Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Lim. I'm from the Deaf Studies program. I want to explicitly address language and how it connects to humanity in my talk about immigrant deaf people of color. A lot of their issues have to do with when they first move here. When we talk about deaf people as a group, we talk about the deaf community, and that raises a concern about what that really means and how that impacts marginalized deaf people, and marginalized, specifically deaf people of color. So they're often left out of academic, political, professional, and national conversations, and there's a huge need for us to raise that issue and ensure that they're not overlooked. So there's complex layers at play. There's a conflation of US-born deaf people of color and immigrant deaf people of color. Many of our experiences are shared. For example, sharing racism. But for immigrant deaf folks of color, we often sort of put them on the back burner. Their ethnicity, their race are not addressed. We want to address their deafness first. And that impacts their identities, because often their identities are more marked by their experiences with racism and the like than by deafness. Especially in today's world with what's happening with ICE and police brutality, we see the impacts on those marginalized deaf communities and their very important identities aside from their deafness. We often discuss deaf culture in the United States as if it's a monolith. But there are many communities of deaf people, not just one. Deaf people of color, and specifically immigrant deaf people of color, exist within those communities and have different identities at play. And they tend to suffer erasure because of that perception of a monolithic deaf culture or deaf community. I began my research with immigrant deaf students of color, looking at students who immigrated, because those students who come here to the US educational program, they came here for educational purposes. And deaf education is not, all of the research and the strategies and the guidance and the theories are really geared toward US-born deaf people. And what we need is a more comprehensive and full picture of the experience of immigrant deaf students of color. So I thought it was important to have that be a starting point to address the conversation at the national level of other marginalized identities within the deaf community. So we have immigrant deaf students of color have to navigate their home discourses, the culture and languages of their home, which are often perceived negatively in the educational environment. So folks who are going through that system, through the educational system, with their immigrant identities, wow, the time has really run short, are not able to maintain pride and identity with their original cultures and communities and identities. So there's complex language situations at play too. Those who experience language deprivation within the deaf community also intersect with immigrant deaf students of color. And we're not really addressing those particular needs when we're looking at exclusively bilingual educational environments. The educational systems are not equipped for that. In terms of language justice, there's multiple conceptual frameworks that we can use to frame our research for this population and this issue. We have intersectionality, disability justice, ratiolinguistics, translanguaging discourse practices, post-colonial translation theory, and cryptlinguistics, and deaf liminality. With that in mind, with those frameworks in mind that I just rifled off at you, we get to the ideal situation where immigrant deaf people of color can be situated in a shared cultural historicity, and they can thrive using schools as a third space where they can interact, meet all of their needs, get all of their needs addressed, and also addressing the gaps in knowledge of the teachers and administrators in those programs who don't have an understanding of these issues. And all the other service providers as well, because they serve to oppress and further marginalize this population. So in other words, we need those people of color from immigrant communities to be able to resist and thrive. Thank you so much. That was tough to do in 4 minutes.